he may not finish this term. He may not finish this term. He may not finish this term. He may not finish. He may not finish this term. Here's why. Here's why. Here's why. Here's why. Here's why. Here's why. Because you are now sowing the seeds that can lead to a Congress being elected that will have the courage to not only have articles of impeachment filed, but to impeach him a third time. Impeach him a third time. A third time. And a Senate. We need a Senate that will convict him this time. And I want you to know from my heart, I understand that he is a Goliath. He is a Goliath. He has control of the generals and the military. He has control of the Justice Department. He has control of the Republican Party. But my friends, for every Goliath, there is a David. There's a David. These are your Davids. There's a David. And I want you to know, Mr. President, this David is going to bring articles of impeachment.
Watch this moment. Witness this spectacle. Feel the gravitational pull of history accelerating toward confrontation, because what you're seeing right here is not political theater anymore. This is Representative Al Green of Texas, standing at a rally speaking words that slice through the comfortable mythology that American democracy has guardrails that hold, that constitutional norms matter when authoritarian impulses collide with them, and he's telling you directly, he's announcing with the fervor of someone who understands the emergency, that Trump might not finish this term because Green is bringing articles of impeachment within 30 days, and you need to understand the magnitude of what's happening because Green was censured by the House Thursday for disrupting President Donald Trump's joint address to Congress Tuesday night in a dramatic protest near the start of Trump's record-long 100-minute speech. When Green rose and spoke out, shaking his walking cane, this man who represents low-income and black communities in Houston stood alone in that chamber and refused to be silent when he told Trump, "You have no mandate to cut Medicaid," and was physically ejected from the building, and now days later he's standing before thousands declaring that Trump is a Goliath, who has control of the generals and the military, control of the Justice Department and the Republican Party, and the reason this matters beyond everything is because Green is naming the reality that so many in Democratic leadership refuse to confront with the clarity it demands. This is about power consolidation that exceeds anything we've witnessed in modern American governance. Green's latest resolution sought to impeach Trump for threatening Democratic lawmakers in Congress with execution over a social media video urging members of the military to refuse illegal orders. Think about that for 1 second. We have a president who said that a video of House Democrats urging military service members to disobey unlawful orders was a seditious behavior, punishable by death, and when Green brought this to the floor, the vote represented a significant shift from June when 128 Democrats voted to table his impeachment motions, but this time House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Whip Catherine Clark, and Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar all shifted to voting present, along with former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and former House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, which tells you that even leadership is starting to recognize the emergency even as the vote-enraged Democrats who despise the increasingly caustic use of impeachment as a political tool but don't want to be seen as supporting Trump's actions and risk angering the party base, with one senior House Democrat saying, "I hate it." And this tension reveals the paralysis at the heart of Democratic strategy, because while Green stands censured and ostracized by his own caucus for breaking decorum, the constitutional crisis metastasizes. Here's what makes this moment devastating in its implications. Trump has teased, stoked, nurtured, fed, and kept alive the improbable notion that he might run and serve one more time, saying at a meeting with House Republicans, "Am I allowed to run again?" Trump told NBC News that there are methods that would allow him to serve a third term, confirming one method where Vice President Vance wins the White House in a future election and then hands over the presidency. But Trump said there were other plans and refused to say what they were. And when asked if he was joking about another presidential run, Trump said, No, I'm not joking. This is happening right now in December 2025, while Representative Andy Ogles of Tennessee introduced a resolution to amend the U.S. Constitution to allow President Donald Trump and any other future president to be elected to serve a third term. introducing the measure days after Trump was sworn in for a second non-consecutive term, and constitutional scholars are warning that such a test of the Constitution's presidential term limits could further destabilize the U.S. political landscape at a time when the ability of the courts and Congress to serve as checks and balances to the White House is under question, with experts saying, "I don't think everyone is going to sit back and let him become a king without fighting back through protest." The David and Goliath framing that Green employs isn't just biblical metaphor, it's strategic recognition that this fight requires moral clarity about asymmetric power because Trump controls the levers of state violence in ways that should terrify anyone who understands how democracies collapse. An executive order issued by Trump this week seems to give him huge power to interpret the law and is raising concerns among legal experts that it could dissuade military commanders from refusing unlawful orders, with the order focused on giving the president greater control over independent federal agencies, but including language that says the President and Attorney General shall provide authoritative interpretations of law for the executive branch of which the Defense Department is a part, which means Trump is asserting the right to define what constitutes lawful military action, and a retired Air Force colonel who previously served as a military judge and the Air Force's chief prosecutor said, "I do worry about the chilling effect. I can definitely see people hesitant to fulfill their duties because they're afraid Trump will have them punished. This is how civilian control of the military becomes authoritarian deployment of armed forces against domestic opposition. And you want to know why Green specifically mentions Trump's control of the Justice Department? It's because Attorney General Bondi ordered the Department of Justice to investigate prominent Democrats named in the Epstein files, but not President Trump, who was also named, and Trump called for 6 Democratic lawmakers to be arrested and put on trial, seemingly for sedition, after they made a video encouraging U.S. service members and intelligence community members to not follow unlawful orders. We are watching the instrumentalization of federal law enforcement for political persecution in real time, and what follows is alarming politicization and weaponization of the Department of Justice under the second Trump administration, with politicization including the misuse of the department's powers for political purposes, rather than independent and impartial enforcement of laws, and weaponization including deliberate and systematic misuse of the department's powers for political or personal purposes, in defiance of the rule of laws. This isn't hypothetical concern about future abuse, this is documentation of ongoing constitutional destruction. Now here's where the story gets even more explosive in what it reveals about resistance and complicity. Democrats continue to scramble for a unified response to the onslaught of radical actions by the Trump administration, with party leadership reportedly urging restraint and decorum, while some members are taking a more confrontational approach. And this strategic paralysis is exactly what Green's actions indict, because Jeffries told Democrats in a closed-door meeting that the new administration was going to flood the zone, and Democrats couldn't afford to chase every single outrage or nothing was going to sink in for the American people, urging members to focus their message on the cost of living along with border security and community safety, which means leadership has made the calculated decision to let authoritarian power grabs slide in favor of economic messaging. Progressives maintain that a stronger response is necessary from their flank amid moderates' hesitation, which some believe is what helped bring back Trump, with one strategist saying, "While Elon Musk is pouring gasoline and dropping lit matches across the federal government, voters don't want their elected representatives acting like deer in the headlights." The censure itself becomes a weapon of normalization, and you need to understand this because Green is the 5th member of Congress to be censured in this decade, and some House Republicans are floating more punitive measures with the House Freedom Caucus, saying its members plan to try to strip Green of his committee assignments, while Congress voted on as many censure measures last week as it did during all of the 1118th Congress, with the House's return to session after the shutdown leading to an explosion of drama and tension between rank-and-file members that had been bottled up during lawmakers' 54-day recess. Barack's procedural warfare masks what's actually happening, which is that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries blamed Republicans for the rising temperature, saying, "What have Republicans done to make life better or meet the needs of the American people in any way, shape, or form throughout this Congress?" The answer is not a nothing. They've done nothing, and so all their members do is cook up these unhinged censure resolutions literally week after week after week. But it's not just Republicans who have pursued censure this week. The entire institution is cannibalizing itself with performative punishment, while the executive consolidates autocratic power. What Green understands that so much of Democratic leadership refuses to metabolize is that during his first week as president in January 2025, Trump issued a host of executive orders, statements, and restructurings that targeted the executive branch, horizontal institutions, and civil society, and in subsequent months the three-level effort has not let up, with his team continuing to exert dominance by stacking the different elements of his aggrandizement agenda into a compressed and simultaneous push, and comparative scholars of Democratic backsliding are explicitly warning that Trump's actions since January 2025 strongly resemble those by leaders of other countries where democracy has been significantly eroded, that Trump is operating from the same autocratic playbook that elected leaders in many other countries have utilized to dismantle democracy, with comparisons to democratic erosion in Hungary under Viktor Orban and in India under Narendra Modi. This is the global pattern of elected authoritarians, and we're watching it unfold in real time with scholarly documentation. And when Green says he's coming for Trump within 30 days, he's recognizing that he was the first Democrat to call for impeachment during President Donald Trump's first term in the White House, and is believed to be the first lawmaker in modern history to be thrown out of a joint session of Congress or a State of the Union address, according to a presidential historian. This man has been sounding the alarm since 2017, and in May 2017, Green presented the first articles of impeachment against Trump, citing the firing of FBI Director James Comey, and in July 2019, he called for Trump's impeachment again, citing the president's attack on 4 Democratic congresswomen of color. Every single time the establishment dismissed him as premature or counterproductive, and now we're living in the reality he warned about, where the military is being federalized for domestic political purposes, and courts are struggling to restrain executive overreach. The military control Green references isn't abstract fearmongering. California Attorney General Rob Bonta secured a ruling by the U.S. District Court, finding that the Trump administration's use of federalized California National Guard troops and Marines for civilian law enforcement in Los Angeles violated the Posse Comitatus Act, and permanently enjoining the Trump administration from engaging in the same or similar activity in the future, including arrests, apprehensions, searches, seizures, security patrols, traffic control, crowd control, riot control, evidence collection, interrogation, or acting as informants. But the Trump administration keeps fighting these court orders, and the federal government revealed it plans to extend the Oregon National Guard troop mobilization, with Brigadier General Kerry Perez stating, "The Department of War intends to extend this mobilization. They're literally calling it the Department of War now, and extending military deployment against court orders. This is how constitutional systems break, when executive power refuses judicial constraint." Here's the part that should galvanize every person who claims to care about democratic governance. Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays said, "We know that we've got a 4-year period that we have to cover here to make sure that our country can survive this absolutely lawless presidency, and someone who I would argue is trying to carry out a coup on our country." That's a sitting state attorney general saying the president is attempting a coup, and one Democratic strategist who has served as a philanthropic advisor to billionaires said radical action is needed to confront the threat posed by Trump and his administration's actions, suggesting Democrats should concentrate on mounting resistance at the state level given the president's demonstrated disdain for Congress and the courts, saying he doesn't care what the other 2 branches say and the other branches don't have guns, he has lots of guns. This is the calculus of power in its most brutal form, the recognition that institutional checks mean nothing when one branch commands violence. And while Green stands virtually alone in Congress willing to force impeachment votes and get physically removed from chambers, meaningful opposition from the Democratic Party has been almost non-existent in the 5 months since Trump began his second term as president, with the so-called resistance to his authoritarianism weaker than the sun over the Arctic in the dead of winter. Because Democrats are beholden to the same pro-Israel corporate and tech donors as the Republicans, and have little ability or desire to truly resist Trump. This donor capture explains why, even as Green brought impeachment articles alleging Trump is an abuser of presidential power, who if left in office will continue to promote violence, engender invidious hate, undermine our democracy, and dissolve our republic, the party machinery refused to back him. The biblical invocation of David versus Goliath takes on searing meaning when you understand that there is little question that Trump is not joking when he talks about running for a 3rd term, despite how fantastical it seems that a president could ignore the 22nd Amendment and all the hurdles to changing the Constitution's 2-term limit. And while running for a 3rd term is clearly unconstitutional, if there's anything Trump has shown us, it's that he can normalize things that don't seem possible, but in this normalization through transgression is precisely why Green's confrontational tactics matter more than leadership's strategic patience, because much of Trump's second-term policy is built on a strategy of testing presidential power even when it violates plain language in the Constitution, such as that giving Congress power over spending or guaranteeing birthright citizenship, and an effort to run again would fit easily alongside those other constitutional tests. What makes this moment historically consequential is that we can see the future Green is warning about already materializing. The more authoritarian Trump becomes, the more he provokes effective opposition, but becomes self. And in Virginia's 11th congressional district, Democrat James Walkinshaw won a recent special election by just under 50 points, 16 better than Harris did in 2024, exactly the average by which Democrats have performed better in special elections in 2025 than Harris did against Trump in 2024. Which means there's an electoral coalition ready to mobilize against Trumpism when candidates give them something to fight for. But that requires the kind of moral clarity and confrontational courage that Green embodies, and that Democratic leadership systematically suppresses, in favor of focus-grouped incrementalism. The tragedy and the promise exist in the same frame here, because when Green invokes the David metaphor, he's not claiming personal heroism, he's issuing a call for collective resistance that recognizes the ability of the courts and Congress to serve as checks and balances to the White House is under question. Experts warn, I don't think everyone is going to sit back and let him become a king without fighting back through protest, saying we're looking at a lot of the weight to fall on the regular people if we don't have the checks and balances of the other two branches. This is the essence of popular sovereignty reasserting itself when institutional mechanisms fail, and Green is modeling what it looks like to put your body and your career on the line when the emergency demands it. The censor he endured becomes badge of honor in this reading, because Green told ABC News he'd welcome any consequences from his disruption, saying he was following the wishes of conscience, declaring, there are times when it is better to stand alone than not stand at all. And Green doubled down on his protest of Trump's speech, saying if given the chance I would do it again. This is civil disobedience within the halls of power itself, the refusal to normalize authoritarian spectacle through silent complicity, and it stands in devastating contrast to the calculation of those like Rep. Tom Suozzi, who voted for the censure resolution posting that Democrats need a better strategy, writing both parties must hold themselves to the same standards we expect from the other side. I am angry about plenty that the president is doing, and what he said the other night, but the punch-counterpunch is not working, as if the problem is that resistance looks undignified rather than that fascism is consolidating power. This is the choice before us illuminated in high relief. Al Green standing censured and marginalized, telling a crowd that Trump may not finish this term because impeachment is coming, because someone has to wield the constitutional tools even when the votes aren't there, because naming the emergency is prerequisite to mobilizing against it. And he's doing this while Green tells Democracy Now! We now live in a government that is of the plutocrats by the plutocrats for the plutocrats, which is the materialist analysis that explains why institutional resistance fails when both parties serve capital, and Green represents a Houston district with large low-income and black populations who understand viscerally what's at stake when Trump yells he has no mandate to cut Medicaid, and in his first term Trump was impeached twice, first in December 2019, over allegations he pressured Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and again in 2021, when he was accused of inciting the Jan 6 insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, with the Senate acquitting the president both times. The Goliath has control of the generals, control of the Justice Department, control of the Republican Party, and increasingly control of the judicial interpretation of constitutional limits. But David has the people and the moral authority that comes from refusing normalization, from standing in that chamber shaking his cane at power, from bringing impeachment articles that name abuse even when they fail, from recognizing that this is the fight of our lives and it requires everything we have, not the managed resistance of party consultants, but the fierce urgency of now that understands some of these changes seem to be attempts to chip away at our democracy, one piece at a time through salami tactics, slicing away at democracy incrementally, and because this happens gradually, it is easy to forget the anti-democratic actions of a week, month, or year ago, and as a result, something that might have been considered beyond the pale a few years prior eventually becomes normalized, which is why experts note the importance of keeping a record to see and remind ourselves how democracy is changing, if we hope to rebuild a stronger, more resilient democracy. This is why Green's confrontation matters, why his impeachment articles matter, why his physical removal from Congress matters, because they refuse the forgetting, they mark the transgression, they say this is not normal, and I will not participate in making it so. And when he tells that crowd within 30 days he's bringing articles of impeachment, he's not predicting victory in the vote. The House voted to table the resolution to impeach Trump after Green forced a vote on the matter, with a Republican motion to table easily succeeding 237 to 140, with the help of 47 Democrats voting present and 23 voting in favor of tabling. He knows the institutional math, but he's creating a historical record. He's mobilizing the base that leadership ignores. He's demonstrating that resistance is possible even from within a captured institution. And he's naming what former President Barack Obama, speaking at a lecture series in Arkansas, criticized as the current politicization of the Justice Department and the U.S. military, while applauding those who are resisting, saying he doesn't think the politicization under President Donald Trump has become complete though, stating, "I think there's been resistance, particularly in the military, to that." So even Obama recognizes both the danger and the incomplete nature of the authoritarian project, which means the fight is still winnable. This is why the David and Goliath framing resonates beyond religious allegory. It's the acknowledgement that asymmetric confrontation requires different tactics than conventional political combat, that when one side commands the apparatus of state violence and the other has only moral authority and popular mobilization, you fight by refusing the terms of surrender disguised as civility. You fight by making the abuse visible even when making it visible gets you censured. You fight by bringing impeachment articles that document the crimes even when you know they'll fail because future historians will ask who stood up and who enabled, and you want to be in the first column. And most of all, you fight because, as Green says in that crowd with his whole heart, these are your Davids, the people organizing at that hands-off rally, the more than 5,000 protesters at Houston City Hall, and millions around the globe who gathered to protest Trump administration policies and efforts by Elon Musk to slash government jobs. This is the collective David that can bring down the Goliath, if mobilized with moral clarity and tactical courage. The stakes could not be higher, and the path could not be clearer. We are living through what scholars of authoritarianism have documented in dozens of countries. The playbook is known, the trajectory is visible, and the tools of resistance exist, but only if wielded by people willing to sacrifice comfort and position for principle. Al Green standing alone shaking his cane at Trump during a joint session of Congress. Al Green censured and singing, "We shall overcome," surrounded by colleagues on the House floor. Al Green telling a crowd he's bringing impeachment articles in 30 days, because Trump doesn't deserve the office he holds. This is what resistance looks like when institutions fail, and it's what all of us must become if democracy is to survive. Not the managed opposition of party elites protecting their donor relationships, but the ungovernable courage of people who refuse to let history record that we went quietly into authoritarianism, who insist that every transgression be named and contested, who understand that the fight is now and the enemy is consolidating power, and the only question is whether we have the collective will to be David against this Goliath. And Green is showing us the way forward, if only we have the courage to follow.